Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally. Everybody, and welcome back to Reclaiming Me for this midweek reframe. This short episode is meant to gently support and integrate what we talked about in the last episode on Monday on attachment styles and play therapy and feeling connected and seen. And it was just a lovely conversation as I'm reflecting back on my talk with the two therapists. And so you'll definitely want to check that out in case you missed it. So if you found yourself on Monday's episode nodding along, or maybe feeling a little confused about some of the language, or feeling maybe resistant, or even thinking, well, this sounds really nice, but I don't know how this applies to me or where to even begin, then you are exactly who this episode is for. Because today is not going to be about doing more work or healing practice to your weekly schedule. It's just simply about softening the pressure to know who you are and what you like or how you are supposed to heal. And before we go any further, I just want to say this clearly that especially for anybody with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, freeze responses, or a nervous system that shuts down when there's too much input. Again, you don't need to try anything that I mention in this episode. In fact, you don't even need to take notes. Please don't take notes unless you really want to. And you don't need to feel open or curious. Just simply listening to this episode means that you've done enough. And if you need to pause or just skip it altogether or stop, that is not avoidance. That is really self-protection. And so for the topic of play, many adults with complex trauma, the concept of play isn't neutral, because if you grew up in environments where people pleasing or perfection or outsourcing your identity or your emotions might have been present, then you may not struggle with effort. Rather, you may struggle with preference. Being asked what you like can feel so overwhelming. It can feel empty, and it can even feel unsafe. I often think back to trainings that I've sat in where we all had to go around and say something that was our hobby or that we like to do for fun. And when this would happen, my body would always tense up because I would just be like searching my brain for what I felt like was supposed to be the correct answer when I just didn't have a big skill set in that area, right? Like I didn't have a lot of language when it came to creativity or leisure time or play. And that was never about lacking a self. What I know now is that it is because your nervous system learned that safety came from adapting and not being in choice. And so for me, when I first started experimenting with play, I immediately chose art, and not because I felt creative. In fact, I felt the opposite. I didn't think I had a creative bone in my body. But I know now that I chose art because art felt very contained for me. But something funny even happened with this that I noticed. Even then, I noticed how quickly I began to turn that into a test. For example, what kind of artist am I? Am I doing this right? Should I commit to one medium like watercolor or chalk or just fine line drawing? That was exhausting and shut me down from wanting to create more. So over time, I made one rule for myself. And the rule was that whenever I was engaging with experimentation and play, I was not allowed to decide what anything meant. So I tried markers. I tried colored pencils. I tried watercolor. I tried collage, and I would do this medium one at a time. And instead of asking, do I like this? I asked myself, how does this feel in my hands? When I am using these mediums, do I feel tense right now? Feeling rushed? Do I want to stop this immediately? Or can I stay another 30 seconds? And I am going to be completely transparent with you all. Some mediums to me felt so irritating. I can think of chalk specifically. I have a sensory issue. And so I didn't like the way it felt on my hands. I didn't like the way that it looked on the paper. I didn't like the smudging. Some mediums felt really flat to me. Like, I don't know, using fine line markers. It was just like, what am I supposed to be doing with this? I just kept drawing the same sunshine and rainbows and houses and stick figures over and over. And one or two, as I started to explore, started to feel quieter in my body. So for me personally, I noticed that sketching and shading and using watercolor, that just seems to work with my body. My nervous system can kind of relax, especially if I put on some music and just really allow myself to settle into the process. And sometimes I don't even know what it is that I'm going to be creating, or sometimes I'll have a visual that'll come to my mind and I'll try that. But for me, it became more about the experience as quieter and maybe not necessarily like this joyful experience that I thought I was supposed to be having. And so neutral for me is a win-win situation. And I want to pause here because this matters. For many CPTSD survivors, we expect healing to feel emotional or relieving, or like we're just supposed to have this big cathartic opening and release. And sometimes we will, but a lot of times it's just neutral. And neutrality, feeling less pressured, less evaluated, can actually be a sign that our nervous system is staying within its window of tolerance. And that's not nothing. That is new information. And when I allowed myself to explore different mediums and I began to look at them as options and not these assignments that I had to carry out, over time, what I began to realize was that play wasn't about art at all. It was about removing the demand. So, as it pertains to movement, sometimes play looked like gentle movement for me, like pacing or stretching, doing like a yin yoga class, which is like a slower form of restorative yoga, which, by the way, I used to hate because I felt like I had somewhere to be and it was wasting my time. But with movement, I have really worked hard to begin to reframe this as not exercise or a way to improve myself or my body. But the most important part is that I have stopped before I have turned it into something that I, quote, should keep doing. And for sound and music specifically, when I wasn't feeling like creating something with my hands, I would notice myself gravitating towards sound. And so maybe it was listening to the same song on repeat or finding myself humming quietly. And again, I really tried not to analyze this because if I was listening to a song on repeat, I began to understand that repetition was not a form of avoidance, but rather it was more about regulation for me. And then as far as sensory or hands-on experiences go, sometimes play for me was sensory, so like touching textured objects or holding something really warm, or maybe sorting something by like a color or a shape. Actually, just got into my closet again the other day during our ice storm we had in Texas, and I found myself going through drawers and not with the intention of cleaning out and organizing, although that was beneficial. It was really calming to me to like fold the clothes and put them in a certain way and organize them by colors. And it was creative, but I wasn't trying to be creative. So no expression, but just really noticing how it softened my body over time. Because when I first started the closet situation, I remember I was feeling a little bit tense about when we were going to be allowed to be back on the roads and back in our offices and schedules. And so it was a good way to interrupt my brain from the overthinking and ruminating flow. And honestly, that play for me does look like organizing sometimes. And again, I really want to stress for those of you that really love or enjoy this, not productivity. Okay. Like, yes, that is a byproduct of it. And it's not about optimizing things, right? But it's more about, again, just arranging the objects in ways that feel temporarily satisfying for you. And then being able to stop before you start to notice it becomes a task. And let me tell you firsthand, for a nervous system that has survived through control, this kind of play felt safer than emotional expression. And so I want to name 3 key takeaways as we close from all of this. And that is number 1, that play is information. It is not performance. Play isn't about fun or self-expression at first. It's about noticing how your nervous system responds when there is no demand being placed on you. That's really huge to understand that distinction. And takeaway number 2, that preference comes after safety. So you don't need to know what you like. Liking often comes later, after your system learns that choice isn't going to cost you connection or safety. And finally, number 3, stopping is part of the healing. Letting yourself stop without finishing, without fixing or justifying it's a powerful form of attachment repair. And so if you want a small experiment this week, here is the invitation. Don't ask yourself what you enjoy. Instead, notice what feels slightly less effortful. What feels neutral instead of draining? What does my body reach for when no one is watching? And then allow yourself to choose one medium, whether that be art or movement or sound or sensory or organizing, and set a tiny container, 1 or 2 minutes. And then when the time is up, stop with kindness. And the hope is that if you do this practice enough and give yourself the patience and the compassion, your container can grow. And so what maybe starts off as 2 minutes becomes 10 minutes and then eventually 20. And then, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, but this comes after a lot of work, your body will begin to crave it. So for me, if I haven't been creative in a while, I start to get irritable. I start to get really rigid again. And I'm like, oh, I'm back to that old pattern of trying to seek safety. And so just play around with it, see what happens. So just to review one more time, number 1, play is about information. It's not about performance. Number 2, play is about preference, and preference follows safety, not the other way around. 3, stopping is not failure. Stopping is part of repair. And if those are the only things that you carry with you from this episode, that is enough. Play did not suddenly make my life joyful. What play did is slowly it made my relationship with myself less abandoning. I stopped demanding clarity. I stopped forcing interest. I stopped needing to know who I was before I was allowed to experience and explore. Healing attachment isn't about becoming playful. It's about becoming safer with yourself. And if all you do this week is notice what feels like too much, just enough, or not enough at all, that counts. I'll see you next time. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.